Thank you for joining us for the second session. It is my pleasure to introduce Jacob van der Beugel, artist, ceramicist and sculptor of Dutch ancestry, born and educated in the UK. Jacob studied the history of art at York University under Professor Dr. Michael White. He was apprenticed to renowned British potter Rupert Spira, then assistant to master potter and celebrated author Edmund de Waal. Jacob has enjoyed artist residencies at the Wellcome Sanger Institute Epidemiology Department at York University and the Wallace Collection, London. His works include the North Sketch Sequence, a permanent architectural installation completed in 2014 at Chatsworth House, Derbyshire, depicting the DNA of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire and their son and daughter-in-law, Lord and Lady Burlington. And the DNA room, completed in 2019, also an architectural installation, commissioned by the Royal Family of the Netherlands, depicting the DNA of the King, Queen, Princess and the global citizen. Jacob van der Beugel today will speak about his fascinating exhibition at the Museum Beelden Aan Zee, titled A Mutating Story. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you, Leanna. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Right, well, I thought I would begin by giving a quick and brief history of the progression of my practice, and then discuss quickly some previous large-scale installations that Leanna just mentioned, at Chatsworth House and the DNA room at Huis and Bosch, and then to discuss the start of concrete-based work, and then the Mutating Story at Beelden Aan Zee, and then my future aspirations and some general thoughts on the interdisciplinarity of my practice. So next slide, please. Excellent. So I come from a craft background where I learned the love of process, the materials, and working diligently at a given practice to understand its totality. And within that, the field of ceramics, it's an incredibly interdisciplinary practice. There's lots of glaze knowledge, a lot of chemistry, a lot of physical considerations. And so my apprenticeship consisted of quite a classical approach where you're only a master after 10,000 hours, supposedly. And I tried to subscribe wholeheartedly to this monastic lifestyle and learnt quite a lot in the process. So issues that held my attention when I was training was the mark of the maker, the importance of the mark of the maker, something that's incredibly important within studio ceramics. And this is sort of reminiscent of the existentialism of abstract expressionism, however, espousing a more self-effacing, although mythical it turns out, craftsmanship of the unknown craftsman, a term utilized by Soetsu Yanagi, originating as an East-West hybrid movement. And I found it quite hard to fulfill the stringent discipline of this, what I feel to be fictitious state of making. And I decided, after a very fruitful period in Edmund de Waal's studio, to embrace a more intuitive approach to my own practice. So really go where I felt instinctively I needed to go. So the mark of the maker began to morph into a presence of humanity and reflections on the self as an abstract entity, and certainly not specific and constrained to my own self. So next slide, please. Wow. So I was lucky enough that Chatsworth House happened to me, and it really did happen to me. And I was fortunate enough to have an epiphany moment where many things seemed to coalesce for me. So my interest in depicting the self, my time immemorial interest in the nature-nurture debate, if it can even be framed as such now, the power of context and architectural installations as a form of immersive artwork, all within this sort of craft framework that I was engaged with. And so here the work depicts, as Liana's already said, the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, their son and daughter-in-law, Lord and Lady Birdington, and something that I call the every person portrait. And what I want to impress upon you is that it's not just an illustration of their DNA sequence profile. There are many, many layered aspects that produce an opaque, viewer-orientated exploration of cultural inheritance, family inheritance, and genetic inheritance. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is culminated in my most ambitious ceramic artwork to date at Huis and Bosch, where I wanted to explore additional notions of the self through depicting the shifting nature of identity and the layered quality that it sort of embodies. And so this work depicts the DNA of the current king, the Netherlands, the current queen, and the future queen. But it also involved curating selected genes in collaboration with Hans Clevers from the Hubrecht Institute. And central to the artwork and architecturally, actually, the central focus of the artwork is the global citizen's portrait, where the goal was to find aspects of being human that we could all relate to. And it is curated in such a way that it's an inclusive representation, which I found surprisingly progressive and refreshing, given the institution where the artwork was located. Next slide. So of particular interest to me is the future portrait, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide and of the wall. To the left is the Queen's portrait. And Hans and I curated symbolic areas of the genome that suggest humanity's obsession with survival through alleviating disease and ultimately death. So you can see on the lower right area the repeated patterns of the Huntington gene, and you can see it as a very regular part of the slide. And here the sequence has inferred to be edited. An attempt has been made to highlight the huge importance for diversity in our population and for its long-term survival, as this has always been an evolutionary plus for combating disease. So we therefore selected two of the most diverse sequences of people's HLA region, which is a region of the genome that is to do with the immune system. And it's typically the most diverging area of everyone's genome. So we also wanted to present a picture of not having attained or climbed to the pinnacle of the evolutionary tree. And this was again done by curating a gene found in some Himalayan communities, specifically the EPAS gene, where a variation confers a greater ability for oxygen uptake. So very much we're not there yet, and probably never will be. But anyway, next slide. Yes. Is that the next slide? Yes, that is the next slide. So I've always wanted to, ever since Chatsworth House and that kind of epiphany moment, I wanted to immerse myself in the science and understanding the various arguments. Because if these installations are going to be situated in these rooms in relatively stable institutions, hopefully, that there needs to be particular attention paid to exactly what is being depicted and what is being said. So I've tried to immerse myself in the arguments. And needless to say, amongst the scientific community, a lot is agreed upon, but there's also a lot that isn't agreed upon. So I decided, as Liana said, to embark upon some artist residencies that facilitated this engagement. And so the first was at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, where I became entranced by cancer genomics. And that is what you see in front of you here. And as Siddhartha Mukherjee claimed, who's a renowned physician, biologist, oncologist, and author, cancer is the emperor of all maladies. So here you see an illustration of a mangled genome highlighting where insertions, deletions, inversions, and mutations have occurred. And it's an incredibly complex picture that is sort of traces the evolutionary history of this cancer cell. So from understanding the depiction of the evolution of a cancer cell, I began to comprehend the unending complexity and ludicrously daunting task of combating this disease. Next slide. So this is another illustration and demonstrates an even denser layer of complexity. And this is the work of Serena Nick Zynal and Mike Stratton, both who were working at the campus at the time, and who I both had the pleasure of speaking to. So these plot graphs describe the occurrence of mutations within the genome and their frequency, and each graph is a different patient's cancer. So here there's a bit of an irony, a bitter irony, that the illustrations are incredibly beautiful and yet actually depict something that is entirely, well, malignant. Next slide, please. Yes. So I made some preliminary sketches, and this is a bit of a crude one, but I thought I'd just sort of illustrate it anyway. And I started to, and basically the ideas of a project started to form, that of the Mutating Story. And it stemmed from my desire to monumentalize all those who knowingly and unknowingly contributed to cancer research as a way of immortalizing that which makes us mortal. So concrete has such a beautiful and established association with monuments and memorials that it was a natural starting point. So it also has a tremendous similarity to ceramics in the way that it endures and is synonymous with permanence and conveying reality. Think of the word concrete in common parlance. A concrete fact, to make something concrete, is a way of establishing something as incontrovertible and real and lasting. So it was with great intrigue that I discovered that the deterioration of reinforced steel in concrete through rust and expansion with water ingress was called concrete cancer. So this anthropomorphizing phraseology belies our own anxiety about the death of our mortal bodies, despite the concrete reality, excuse the pun, of our physical existence. Next slide. So I was allowed to collaborate with the epidemiology department in 2016 at York University, more specifically the sexily titled Epidemiology Cancer Statistics Group. And this sounds incredibly niche, which it is, but essentially they look at ways of interpreting a totally confusing picture of hematological malignancies in a specific cohort group, where the essential was to curate a gold standard data. So the resulting artwork was my first foray into using concrete, and it's called The Pathways of Patients, and describes the epidemiological phenomena, and excuse the terminology, and it describes the phenomenon of people who get a blood diagnosis of a blood malignancy. Their socio-demographic circumstances play a crucial role in their survival outcome, despite the disease occurrence having no socio-demographic causation. So this fact is unique amongst cancers, I believe, and actually beautifully highlights the need for health reform. So I used the material roughness and refined polished spectrum to denote the socio-demographic index. So the coarse to denote the poor, the smooth to denote the affluent areas. So the smooth is on the left, the coarse is on the right. Next slide. Yes. So here you can see the pathways plot on the left, or the start of diagnosis, which is the plot. And from there, the pathway continues. And so it flows through the smooth and gets clogged and dammed by the rough concrete. This articulating, hopefully, the central premise of the epidemiological research that I was interested in. Next slide. So I was lucky enough to visit Henk Jonkers at his micro lab at the TU Delft engineering department after an introduction by Robert Zwijnenberg, and I immediately had an instinctive affinity with his area of research, namely self-healing concrete caused by bacteria that produce calcite under certain circumstances. And I loved again this anthropomorphizing, the idea that somehow this inanimate material was capable of healing itself like a concrete immune system in effect. Next slide. So here we can, I love these images of his lab. They're just, yeah, they're incredible. Anyway, here you can see these monolithic test samples on the left being subjected to stress tests, and to your right, the concrete's performance under more saline conditions, important for sea defenses or coastal areas, I guess. Next slide. Yeah. So this then sparked the development of the work that is currently on show at Beelden Aan Zee, called The Mutating Story. So it's called this because I wanted to evoke the idea of a narrative of change or mutation in our cells, but also the shifting developments of our scientific knowledge that never remains static. So what you see here is a body of work that attempts to depict change in materials that are incredibly resistant to change. And the work is quite monumental in scale. It's 3 meters, each panel, of which there are 4, is 3 meters by roughly 2 meters. And so these materials, concrete and ceramics, yeah, and I've probably neglected in this presentation so far to convey my absolute love of materials and desire to push them and myself to their physical boundaries as well as metaphorical boundaries. So we crave a degree of permanence, but are regularly assaulted by this impossibility. So cellular change being a fundamental physical, biological, and chemical law of atrophy. So this piece depicts change that naturally occurs in one's lifetime, with the block extrusions increasing from left to right, and the block extrusions denotes areas of change within the genome or within the self. And so the color gradation assisting the general impression of time passing. So this is in essence a contemporary Memento Mori, and it can be seen as a large concrete biological slide that has the potential to evoke many associations, those clouds of associations that Robert Zwijnenberg was talking about. Next slide. So the next panel, mutation 2, which you see here, depicts a diseased state where the mutations and extrusions escalate to the point where the concrete cannot sustain the assault. And you see it spalling on the right-hand side of the panel. And to quote David Agus, who is an author, oncologist, and director of the Institute of Transformative Medicine in Los Angeles, and he says, cancer is an interaction of a cell that is no longer under growth control within its environment. So my depiction, I feel, adds to this notion that it is sucking up the environment until it can sustain it no more. Slide, next one, please. So this is mutation 3 and projects a scenario where this mutation is contained. On your left, it's contained until it becomes unsustainable on the right-hand side of the panel. So much like the managing of a chronic condition. So I used an increasing amount of self-healing bacteria, which is the agent that Henk Jonkers has pioneered, and I used this in the main body of the panel in increasing quantities from left to right, sort of using the self-healing agent as this sort of medicinal metaphor in this context. And this becomes problematic when the increased doses of the medicine becomes unsustainable and actually weakens the concrete mix. And this is what I did. So at the latter end of to the right end of the panel, I used a ludicrously high percentage of the healing agent to see what would happen in years to come. So in this piece, I wanted the associations really to flow, that of the human-urban proliferation, and that we are managing our existence on this slab of earth like a chronic condition. Next slide. So this is a complicated panel, mutation 4, because the future is complicated. And I wanted to present a future picture of mutation, of change. So the ceramic cells here of a close-up, which I'll show you later, have been reinforced and surrounded by steel and stainless steel to suggest a bionic quality with an enhanced performance. So on the right-hand side, you see this enhancement where the rate of change, i.e. the little block extrusion, appears to have been abated. So I wanted the viewer to think about this paradox. To halt change or mutation is a desire and necessary requirement for longevity, yet it is the very change and our response to it that makes us so very human. So therefore, ultimately, the question that this body of work poses for me is that if change is indefinitely contained, we will have become post-human. And not until this moment has arrived, which granted seems a very distant future, can we consider to be beyond this form, our form of humanity. Next slide. So here we have a close-up of the materiality of the work, where finally you can see the textures and the highly revealed surface. So the polishing of the surface, for me, is this sort of metaphor of trying to explore and reveal what is going on underneath. And the ceramic extrusion on your left has a cellular quality and color that appears to be in flux from yellow to red. And the extrusions on the right appear to be sucking the color or draining the color out of the concrete body that it sits within. And with this comes all sorts of anthropomorphic associations, but also environmental associations. So the main challenge of this body of work was to create change from materials that are as stable as it gets. The work is paradoxically change in stasis. Next slide. So this is a close-up of the borders surrounding the mutations in mutation 3. And it is initially well contained and managed, and then becoming increasingly fractured as deterioration occurs. So the thicker black particles on the right compared to the left have been infused with this self-healing agent, yet despite this increasing density of concrete medicine, the defenses appear to be crumbling. I.e., when does the medicine become the disease, or the remedy worse than the disease? A question that many have been trying to get to grips with, given today's circumstances. And I love how this the work embraces the notions of the micro and macro all at once. And that's something that Carl, I believe, was discussing in his lecture. On the one hand, being topographical, like a mapping of increased human urbanization and its consequences to the environment. On the other, a micro scale of cellular change contained within every one of us. Next slide. So here is a close-up of mutation 4, where the surrounding cells are steel or stainless steel, creating this bionic feel. And on the right, we have cells that are more angular, perhaps evoking notions of a digital self. Can we ever consider ourselves post-human when we are concerned with the fundamental fact of atrophy and our attempts to mitigate against it, since it underpins so much of who we are? Next slide. Then I wanted to produce some more, slightly more whimsical pieces that evoke concrete's dominance in the construction industry, producing columns with protrusions of reinforcement bars, much like you see in the slides here. And the reinforcement protrusions are different in each piece, which I'll show you in the next slide. Each time with the material has an increased strength or an increased ability to endure, therefore deploying a language of future possibilities. And on the lower right is one of the pieces being extracted from its mold. Okay, next slide. Yes. And then I wanted to produce, these are the pieces, the columns called order M1, 2, 3, and 4, and it evokes a sort of classical terminology of columns, but also our inherent battle to create order from our turbulent reality. Next slide. Yes. So currently I'm engaged with an architectural practice for the Ellison Institute of Transformative Medicine, where I'm searching for a more granular texture to the concrete. For me, this is a quest, this granularity is a metaphor for science's quest for a finer resolution, always delving to increasing magnitudes of scale, but perhaps not being able to retain the macro picture that I'm more concerned with. The book Micromegas, or the short story Micromegas by Voltaire springs to mind if you should ever want to read it. Next slide. And here you can see some of the cell aggregates that I've been developing which I've been creating for the project. So finding new ways of depicting change or degradation. Here there's these little bits of paper have been burnt out of the ceramics at your top left. And again, I've used these little black balls that you can infuse with the self-healing agent of Henk Jonkers, and I'm really combining all these things to create this new vocabulary for me. Next slide. Yes. So my ultimate ambition is to use all this interdisciplinarity for a wider application. So I'm very keen to modernize remembrance spaces. And so the non-secular tradition seems to me to still dominate this area, given our increasingly materialistic worldview. I would like to provide an alternative space where people's suffering and memory can be dignified and democratized in a what I would feel to be more appropriate space, architectural space. So that's one ambition. Next slide. Yes. Another idea centers around our ability to store information in synthetic DNA, where digital information can be converted to DNA and stored indefinitely without becoming obsolete. Since it is assumed we will always be able to have the ability to sequence the genome because it is what we are composed of ourselves. So this technology is still in its early phase, but essentially all forms of media can be stored and in an incredibly compressed format. So it could potentially revolutionize many ways of storing information for future generations, potentially becoming these incredible synthetic fossils. So it's very important, I think, to think about how this is stored, what we are storing for the future. Next slide. Next slide, is that possible? It doesn't, yeah. Oh, wow, look at that. So to conclude quickly, I I do not do this to push any agenda. And what remains central to my modus operandi is to create a space where metaphor, architecture, beauty, material, context, wonder all combine to produce an arresting space where one can contemplate one's own position in relation to these subject matters. So this doesn't happen instantly. The visceral materiality and aesthetic quality of the work slowly, I hope, induces a cerebral response in this kind of neutral environment. So my use and engagement with other disciplines, philosophy, epidemiology, and science, all goes into enhancing this artistic space. So I do not profess to be an expert, far from it, but I merely profess to be an individual who is fortunate enough to be allowed to engage with people from different sectors and find links where others might not, and present them independent from any governing body or lobby group. So whilst my voice may not always resonate that far into the ether, I believe wholeheartedly that this approach is crucial to furthering debate, understanding ourselves, and navigating through our opaque future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jakob. Thank you for that inspiring presentation. We're just running short of time, so we'll just have a couple of questions. Firstly, your works are the result of profound research in collaboration with partners from scientific fields, but also a result of artistic choice of material, but also a form. Can you specify a bit more how this process works, how and when you decide about this form?
So I think really it's a kind of slow build-up of artistic vocabulary. So as I mentioned, I started off as a potter, and so my initial language was that of ceramics, and of movement and of touch and of wanting to highlight the self, or the mark of the maker, as I described it. But then that is slowly, that has sort of limiting effects when it comes to portraying certain things that I'm interested in. So therefore, my sort of vocabulary has sort of grown with the areas of research that I'm interested in, and it's not necessarily a conscious choice. It's just the co-evolution of my artistic vocabulary, I guess.
Yes, and that leads to another question. You were talking about your identity, your sense of self. Do you feel like your collaborations with scientists have led to the development of a scientific segment in your identity?
Gosh, that's a complicated question. So can you say that again?
Do you feel like your collaborations with scientists have led to the development of a scientific segment in your identity?
Oh, in my own personal identity?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess that distills it quite nicely. I very much think of when I'm working on these projects, what the scientific ramifications are of the research upon how I view myself, and I guess that very much informs my work and how I go about it, definitely.
And lastly, how might your work contribute to the preservation of cultural information, in particular for Indigenous or marginalised peoples?
Well, that is a really good question. So I'm very much into storage technologies and storage in general, but there is an enormous merit to doing this.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Jakob.
No problem. Thank you very much.